they come. The green flag. They're off.
Hi everybody, today it's as hot as an oven outside, and I'm going to take another look at a title that came out in 2005, over 20 years ago, called Raceway 57, published by Porch Classics. I'll tell you up front, I really like it because I think it's a fine, underrated entry-level stock car racing game. Notice I have the second bookshelf edition. I call it the mid-tier version in terms of production quality. There are notable cosmetic differences between multiple versions of the game that are available. I'll talk more about that as we go along. Also, as you're about to see, I customized my copy. I repainted my cars and added a few extra features. But before I get into the details, I will explain how I got here. I think it's important to do this for this type of channel. If I'm not reviewing new, the least I can do is provide some justification for old. So I grew up in a small town with 3,000 population. Not much going on there. But the one thing our town did have was a racetrack. My dad took me to the races as a kid, so I was hooked at an early age. My favorite class was street stock. These were the cars with big V8 engines, guys racing Chevelles, Novas, Cutlasses, Monte Carlos on a clay oval on street tires. So here's what our track looked like in the early 1990s. This is what I saw. So you can see the red car. My very favorite model of car for this type of racing when I was a kid was the 74, 75 Pontiac Le Mans. They seem to do really well. I like the body lines. They look like sharks almost with this sweeping curves. So anyway, you can tell I like cars. I like classic cars. I like stock cars. I like classic stock car racing. The absolute thunder of an 8-cylinder feature race with 20 plus cars in it. Wow, it's like music to my ears. And I never wore ear protection. Nobody did back then. All the fans just went partially deaf, literally. By the way, that class of racing was gone around the year 2000. All those cars eventually ended up in the scrapyard. Track is still there, but now it's mostly mini stock, 4-cylinder racers, minivans, stuff like that. Sad for me because that's not my style of racing. So nowadays, I just have to rewatch classic NASCAR on YouTube. There are clips from the 1950s, all the way to complete races through the 1980s. I find all that interesting. I stopped watching around the early 1990s because I don't really like the newer cars. I like the era when cars on the track still looked like cars on the street. I'm talking about the stock cars that still had real bumpers, window trim, and grills and everything. And so I always wanted a game like Raceway 57 that portrays my preferred era of racing. When I saw this copy of the game for sale locally, it was an automatic buy, and it wasn't expensive. But what do we have here? Essentially, it's a roll and move with a few really clever resource management features. I'll explain. There are not too many rules. I made a custom summary. It almost fits on a single page. You have 5 cars, so ideally it's a 2 to 5 player game. You race around a short oval track for 3 laps. During the course of the race, players must manage 4 resources: fuel, tires, suspension wear, and chassis damage. Pit stops are recreated here. In this game, you won't be able to compete for a win without making at least 1 pit stop. That particular aspect of racing is implemented quite well here. So now I'll show you the cars that I use. I repainted mine to look like actual NASCAR entries from 1957. They're made out of chunky metal. In the second edition anyway. Third edition, the cars became plastic. But out of the box, they're always just generic colors: red car, green car, blue car. I wanted something that looked more relatable, so I went with 87 Buck Baker, 46 Speedy Thompson, 55 Tiny Lund, 98 Marvin Panch, and number 3 Paul Goldsmith. So if you're wondering why these specific drivers, I considered name recognition as well as car paint schemes. So I thought, I could have gone with Curtis Turner, but his car looked just like Goldsmith's since they were both from Smokey Yunick's garage. You could go with Lee Petty, but his car looked like the Speedy Thompson car, except with blue numbers instead of red. So that was the thought process. But I like all the drivers from that era. Cotton Owens, Fireball Roberts, Bobby Myers was going to be a great driver, I thought, before he died in a race. All of them. Like I said, I'm a fan. Anyway, at the start of this game, each player gets a reference dashboard that tracks their car and race information. You have a little lap count dial at the top even. They're neat. They have wheels that simulate gauges and everything. Very immersive, I think, especially for kids. But I don't use them because I prefer the more simple reference cards or player mats that came with the first edition. You can download scans of these from BGG, and that's what I did. And then I just used a bunch of extra wooden cube markers on them. Originally, these components were made of tin and came with little magnets. I find the cards are able to convey information from across the table with barely a glance. The dashboards, not so much. You can also modify the info cards easily. I added to the lap counter, for example, in case I wanted to run longer races. Anyway, to start the race, players roll off to determine which lane they start on, from inside to outside, and then they also roll off to determine the turn order. Track is 5 lanes wide. Obviously, the shortest route around the track is the inside lane. It may not look like it, but each lane is 4 spaces longer than the next as you move from inside to outside. So track position is always going to be crucial, as you might imagine. Next step is to deal 3 cards to each player. Then the race starts. Players take turns moving. Players move by rolling 1d6 or by playing one of their 3 special cards. The first turn, however, the rules say no card plays. You actually have to roll 1d6 to move on turn 1. Cars move forward spaces according to what you roll, or diagonally forward spaces, or they can change lanes sideways as long as 1 forward movement comes after each lane change. There is no 2 sideways lane changes in a row. You can't move through other cars either. So it is possible to be blocked. And if and when you get forced to the outside, you may use the drop-down arrow to cut the corner for a cost of 1 movement, as long as no other cars are in the spaces crossed by the arrow. If you don't want to roll to move, you can expend a card to move instead. The cards themselves are kind of goofy because they're predominantly flavor text and pictures of random car parts. The only thing on any card that really matters is the red number. Some of these are above 6, and they go up to 10, so much higher than a max die roll to move. However, the larger numbered cards come with restrictions. For example, cards with 8 to 10 movement allowance say that you can only play them if you're in last place. The lower number cards you can play anytime, and the mid-level cards you're able to use as long as you're not in the lead, so you have to be mid-pack. So as you play, you might find you're rolling to move more than you'd like because 3 cards is not a lot, and you may not be in the right track position to use what you hold in your hand most of the time. There is a rule that says you can swap out one of your cards for a blind draw from the deck if you declare a safe move of just 2 spaces forward on a turn, like you intentionally hang back 1 round to strategize. I find most players don't use that rule, but it's there as an option. Now, there is also a fun bonus feature that augments standard die roll movement. You can conduct a 1-time red line maneuver. For my game, I created custom tokens to mark whether or not cards have used up that option. Dashboards have working tachometers that you can crank over, which is pretty funny to show you've redlined. So what you can do is, if you roll 6 to move, you can then roll again multiple times as long as each roll is 1 point less than the previous roll. So the optimal redline move would be to roll 6, then a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all in one go. Most players try to save this option for the end of the race. It's also pretty funny when it backfires on a player because they might roll a 1 right after the 6, for example. And so there's always big trade-offs for making big moves in this game. Every time a car moves, it uses up resources, even throughout the course of a special red line maneuver. So whenever a car moves 1 to 3 spaces, it's minus 1 resource. 4 to 6 spaces, minus 2 resources. And anything 7 spaces above is always minus 3 resources. So how do you know what resources get used up? Depends on the shade of the track space you land on at the end of your turn. Game comes with several reference cards that help you remember that white spaces subtract fuel, gray subtracts suspension, and black subtracts tires. Chassis strength gets run down a different way. Player ends movement directly in front of another car by way of forward diagonal movement or sideways movement. In other words, if you ever decide to aggressively cut off an opponent, the active player may then choose to initiate something called a chassis challenge. It's just a simple roll-off. The loser takes 2 chassis points damage while the winner takes just 1 point damage. So you can see cars take a ton of wear and tear in this game, and it adds up quickly. Fortunately, there are 4 cards in the deck that are wild cards, meaning they have a W on them instead of a number, and you can play 1 to neutralize anywhere you would otherwise normally take in a turn. And yet, even considering the wild cards, it's safe to say that going into turn 2 on the second lap, players will be very concerned about resource management, and you will have significant wear on tires and suspension at that point, and fuel will be running low. You can't go 3 laps full throttle without a pit stop, that's for sure. You might not even be able to make 2 laps. If you ever get to a 0 on a resource, your max speed drops to just 2 spaces a turn until you can make a pit stop. Chassis damage is different. If your car gets so bent up that your chassis level is 0, then your car is out of the race, so it's wrecked. So this brings us to pit stops. The rules for pit stops are fairly straightforward. To replenish resources, you must stop in your designated pit box. On your next turn, you conduct repairs. The player may draw back up to 3 cards and recharge 4 resource points of any kind. You cannot move on the same turn as you regain resource points. If you enter the pits with a very rundown car, it might be even advisable to spend an extra turn in the pits. You would get another plus 4 resource points, but no more cards. You can never have more than 3 cards in your hand at any given time. And finally, you just leave the pits after you finish repairs and try to be the first car to cross finish line after completing 3 laps to win the race. And that's how you play Raceway 57. So how is it in practice? Well, it's amusing. It's fine for what it is, a simple entry-level tabletop game. I played it head-to-head with just 2 cars on the track and enjoyed it. Going into it, you can never tell who's going to win. The action is swingy. The game incorporates plenty of catch-up mechanics. It's not a total luck fest. Definitely got some fun decision-making elements to it. Obviously, a lot of thought and care went into it. Like, the 3-lap race seems to be the exact race length needed to include that pit stop drama, without the whole experience overstaying its welcome, because admittedly, there's just not much to it. So if you're anything like me, you might even be tempted to try out some add-ons, house rules, or a few extra features to spice up the action. You can find cool ideas for mods on BGG. I also came up with a couple that I can share with you. So first, I added rules for secondary effects of bumping chassis challenges, because this aspect of the game often does not become a serious issue unless everybody's hitting each other and being hyper-aggressive at every opportunity. Only in that case might you see someone actually crash out. Anyway, I took some oil slick markers and debris markers from a Car War set and came up with the following. Roll 1d6 on this chart after every chassis challenge. 1 in 3 chance debris falls on the track, 1 in 3 chance oil drops on the track, 1 in 3 chance nothing extra might happen. And so if a car passes over oil, its next moves must be sideways until it touches the outside wall. After the car hits the wall, its movement ends for the current turn. For debris, if a car runs over it, you have to roll on a table to check for extra tire or suspension damage. I also came up with 5 extra event cards that you can add to your deck. Try to keep them thematic within the spirit of the game. So you have a spin out card. If you end a move directly behind another player, you can land them against the outside wall on the next turn without forward movement. You can play Thread the Needle. This allows you to pass through other cars when using the drop down arrow. You can side slip. If you end a move behind another car, you immediately slip to a space diagonally in front of the car ahead. If there's a line of multiple cars ahead, you slip to the front of the line. You can play a really fast pit stop. You get 2 bonus movement points. On the same turn, you complete repairs. And finally, you can play in-car cigarette to get 1 reroll during the course of a red line maneuver. That's self-explanatory. For example, I noticed after Speedy Thompson won the 1957 Southern 500, you can see when he climbs out of his car in Victory Lane, he's all covered in dirt and oil from head to toe, but he's got a cig in his hand. Watching footage from the 1950s, you see a lot of stuff that's different. No window nets, pit crews out there just wearing t-shirts, some smoking pipes, drivers smoking, flagmen standing on the track waving flags, no safer bearers or catch fences. So it's insane by today's standards, but still the good old days. So the question is, does the game take you back there? I think so, especially if you are a race fan, you're looking for a retro theme. The first edition is probably the best. It's the one that has a win case, and it even comes with a little metal trophy you give to the winner. The only thing I don't like about it is that the track graphics don't have texture like in the second edition. Third edition is the least expensive of all, but it's a cardboard and plastic production. Although it really doesn't matter, it's the same game. You can find any version on the secondary market, no problem. So my conclusion is, if you need a simple, fun, family-friendly racing game, why not give Raceway 57 a try? Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.